second hour of the Areva Martin in Real Time show. And I am Angela Redoff Wright, guest hosting for Areva Martin today. And I'm so honored to do so. I am a host here at KBLA Talk 1580 on Saturdays with the Legal Lens with Angela show. So I encourage you all to catch my show, where right now we're doing a series on small businesses and the legal issues that small businesses face. But so honored to guest host for my dear friend, Areva Martin. And I just congratulate her on having such a great show and such great guests, as is evidenced by today. Again, thank you to our guests in our first hour, where we had Dr. Omekongo Dibinga from American University, and Juan Winans, activist, advocate, singer-songwriter, and yes, he is a part of the famous Winans family. In this hour, we have coming up, as first half hour, we have Alec McGillis, who is a reporter for ProPublica and The Atlantic. And we're going to break down and talk about an article that he wrote recently, which examines social media's role in accelerating violence. And such an important topic, because we know social media does indeed accelerate and bring a really bad light to so many issues at times, and that ends up resulting in unfortunate violence. So we look forward to that conversation with Alec McGillis. Just to remind you of some of the headline news that we covered in our first hour, news that is trending across the news channels. In fact, it's so hard to keep up with the news sometimes these days, because so much is trending and so much is happening. But we did talk about the recent Fulton County, Georgia grand jury indictment for former President number 45 on multiple crimes related to conspiracy, along with 18 of his allies and friends and cronies. We also talked about the 6 white police officers in Mississippi who subjected 2 Black men to hours of grueling violence. They're now being charged with combined 13 felonies in connection with the torture and physical abuse of these men. And they actually pled guilty. And so we'll be interested to see how that story unfolds. Hollywood's still on strike. We didn't really get to cover that topic, but we are all waiting with bated breath to see what happens with the SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild strike. And really, our hearts go out to those individuals, because their families are being impacted, their lives are being impacted. And also just, a lot of people are out of work right now. Restaurants are being impacted, just the whole industry that supports Hollywood. And if you are, a big fan of TV like I am, and movies and so forth, we're starting to see the pause in our shows, and the shows are starting to run out. So we certainly hope that Hollywood is back to work soon. We also talked about the exciting news of the DNA connection that has helped to connect over 42,000 living descendants of enslaved individuals to possible relatives that are still living. So we're looking forward to see how all of that unfolds, and how we're able to connect with our family that's out there, and to kind of, as our 2 guests in the prior hour said, kind of build on the history of African Americans in this country, in the United States, and helping us to remind us that we are all connected, and that our history just didn't start with being enslaved, that we have a history that goes far, far, far back, and that is a deep history, and one which we should be so proud of. We didn't get to cover the story of Michael Orr, retired NFL star. He was featured in the movie The Blind Side, that we thought that was his story, but he has come forward with a lawsuit against that family, saying that he was misled, that he thought he was adopted, but it was really a conservatorship, and that he didn't benefit from the proceeds of that movie, The Blind Side. So I'm sure Areva will be picking up on that topic in future shows and dissecting that with future guests. And then, of course, we're proud of the young people in Montana who stood up in favor of climate change and environmental change by bringing a landmark lawsuit, a landmark case that challenged the state's failure to consider climate change when evaluating new projects and causing harm. They were victorious in that case. We're hearing that there will be appeals, but for those of us who question whether the younger generation cares, whether they have it in them to stand up for, important issues. I think they're demonstrating to us every day that they do have it within them, that they do care, that we haven't strip them so much of things to be proud of, that they're not standing up to fight for the next generation. So kudos to those young people in Montana. So when we come forward, we will begin our discussion with Alec McGillis, again, a reporter for ProPublica and also for The Atlantic, talking about his recent article, which delves into the impact of social media on violence in our society. Very important discussion. You don't want to miss it. Don't turn that dial. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't turn it off, and come forward with us as we discuss an important topic with Alec McGillis.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
Thank you for continuing with us on KBLA Talk 1580. This is the Areva Martin in Real Time Show. Angela Redoff Bright, guest hosting for Areva. And today, in our second hour, we welcome Alec McGillis, who is a reporter for ProPublica and also Atlantic. And in both publications, he just published an article, or recently published an article, related to social media's role in accelerating violence in our society. Welcome, Alec. So tell us, what caused you to investigate this topic of social media and its relationship to violence among young people?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on the show. It's great to be here. So I've spent the last couple of years at ProPublica looking into this terrible resurgence of violence that we've had around the country. As you and your listeners probably know, we've had this terrible spike basically since the start of the pandemic, where we had a 30% increase nationwide in homicides in 2020. Just horrible. This huge surge after many years of steady declines in violence. We had this big spike, and then it went on. It got even worse in 21. It's gone a little better the last year or two, but we're still way above where we were before the pandemic. And I set out trying to figure out what was happening, and I've written several stories about this, about various factors, including, of course, all the dislocation that came with the pandemic, the school closures, the closures of rec centers and libraries and courts, how the breaking the social fabric sort of led to a rise in violence, and then also, of course, the effect of the murder of George Floyd, which was followed by protests and a real kind of shift in the police community relations around the country that also probably contributed to this rise in violence. But one other thing I kept hearing violence prevention workers on the ground tell me was that social media was just playing a bigger and bigger role in fueling violence, especially among young people. We've unfortunately seen an especially large increase in homicides and shootings among young people. There's been a 91% increase in homicides, victims aged 15 to 19 since 2014. Just astonishing. And so one thing I just kept hearing from violence prevention workers was that social media was playing a role, that the instigation that comes with social media is just on a whole other level of what used to happen kind of face to face, person to person in school or, on the street, that there's just so much more that social media provocation carries with it such greater force because it stays up longer, it reaches many more people, it travels much faster. So you as a individual who is being targeted by this kind of instigation feel much more pressure to respond because your reputation, your honor is somehow seen as being at risk among a much vaster audience. And so you feel like you have to do something. And so I started looking into this dynamic, and I found all these terrible cases from around the country where social media had in fact played a role in instigating people to do violence against each other, and wrote this article.
So how did you, just backing up a little bit, what did your research consist of? What did your research consist of? How did you go about doing this analysis?
So it really just it started with just hearing anecdotally about from all these. I had been talking to violence prevention workers in Louisville and Baltimore, where I live, and Chicago and LA. It was actually one of the strongest voices I heard on this whole subject was from Fernando Rejon, who's the director of the Urban Peace Institute in LA, big violence prevention organization there, who was just
I just started following their work.
Yeah, and he was very eloquent, very forceful, talking to me about the role that social media was playing. And then I started just looking for some cases around the country, basically doing what a lot of reporters do, which is searching the clips and looking for cases where Instagram or Facebook Live or YouTube had come up as a major factor in a given homicide, a given court case, and started looking into some of these cases and deciding on which ones to focus on, and then diving into those few cases that I decided to focus on. In one case, the case that I led the article with, actually went to the trial of 3 teenagers who had been charged in that really heartbreaking double homicide. It was a case involving 2 friends, 2 26-year-old young men in West Philadelphia who had grown up in West Philly, but had managed to, get to college, graduate college, had good jobs, had gone on a vacation together. They'd saved up for a vacation in Puerto Rico, gone to Puerto Rico for 5 days together, had a great time, came home, and, just after coming home, they were sitting in the car outside one of their mom's house, and someone drove up in a stolen SUV, apparently mistook them for the other side in a long-running feud that had been fueled by a lot of online back and forth on Instagram, and they shot up the car, 24 bullets, and total mistaken identity. And afterward were, once again, kind of, bragging online, kind of with, telling the other side, hey, we got your guy, come pick him up. And was not who they thought it was. It was just these two friends, and so I focused on that case and several others. But I also one other very powerful moment in my reporting was watching Washington D.C. has had a really terrible resurgence of violence the last couple of years, especially among young people, and they've got all these violence prevention efforts going on now. And they had an online class that was basically being given on Zoom for people who wanted to get involved in violence prevention in the community. And this 1 hour of this training session focused on online, on social media, and drill music, and how to deal with that new challenge. And it was fascinating watching these two trainers basically walk these community members through this whole threat, and they gave several examples with all sorts of screenshots of a couple feuds in Washington that had led to actual homicides and shootings, and in one case a homicide. And so just delving into this realm as much as I could, also talking to researchers who've been dealing with this, researchers who've been aware of this for the better part of a decade, and have been trying to come up with ways to somehow monitor social media to pick up on this instigation before it becomes violent, or other ways of trying to basically deal with this challenge. And then finally, I also, of course, talked to the companies, and the big tech companies were strikingly, well, I'll just say that I was struck by how little they seem to have reckoned with this problem. And
that's definitely a question I have for you. Are the companies doing anything to try to limit that, or to kind of catch some of these posts at the onset and limit them from spreading?
Not really. I mean, it was really something to talk to them and see just how little they seem to be dealing with this. They all have various what they call community standards or community guidelines for that supposedly kind of govern what's allowed to stay up on the sites, but those guidelines are very vague, and they're in the case, for instance, of Google, which owns YouTube, they're not only vague, but they actually are explicitly lax when it comes to some of this stuff. So I was asking Google about two specific YouTube videos that I had come across that were just really stark. One was in Louisville. It was a drill music video of some guys in Louisville who were taunting a guy who had just been shot and who was on life support in the hospital. And the name of that song that they were performing was, Pull the Plug. And then another YouTube video from DC, the one I just referred to, where it was, a video of one guy sort of threatening his ops, and he ended up being shot and killed a couple months shortly after that video went up. And I asked Google why these videos had been allowed to stay up, and they were still up, and they had 15,000 views. And they said that they basically have an explicit exception for in their harassment policies, an exception for music videos. They're seen as creative expression, like scripted art, basically. And so there's just this real emphasis on free speech, on free expression. That's how they like to phrase it, these companies. The other way of looking at it, of course, is that they just get lots of traffic from this stuff, and it's sort of
turning a blind eye to it.
Yeah, turning a blind eye to it. Very laissez, exactly, in the name of commerce. It's very laissez-faire.
Is there any legislation, like at the federal level, or any states taking action against this type of this impact in social media?
Not really. So much of the legislative debate around the big tech has been focused more on, I guess, what you'd call like political speech on the platforms, on speech that's deemed to be incendiary from a political standpoint. Often
like the January 6th.
Yeah, exactly. So, that often, it's focused mostly on right-wing political incendiary stuff. And that's where the whole debate has focused. What obligation do the platforms have to monitor their themselves for that kind of material, and is that material protected by free speech, and so on. There's been much less attention given to this kind of this kind of the very routine instigation that leads to terribly routine urban violence. And part of that, of course, is a practical matter. There's just so much of it that it's almost like it's like a fire hose, right? Like where do you even begin to look to try to pick up on things that could actually lead to violence. It's so hard to actually often know until unfortunately until it's too late.
Right, right. So in our last few minutes together, your article also shared some really startling statistics, particularly as it relates to African American youth between the ages of 10 to 24. You stated that in 2021, African Americans ages 10 to 24 were almost 14 times more likely to be the victims of a homicide than young white people. Did these findings shock you? And what do we make of that?
They're completely shocking, and I can't believe we don't talk about them more. I saw another graph recently that was truly stunning. It showed that the firearm homicide rate for Black men in this country has now returned to where it was in 1991. At what we think of, the peak of those really bad years, where we just had that, our most violent years ever, back, the era of Menace to Society and Boys in the Hood and all that, like the Rodney King era. Like we had so many years of real improvement in violence in our country. And for Black men in America, we have now returned to that exact level. It's like a U curve, a horseshoe. And that was just, just completely took my breath away. And there's such an incredible disproportion. We've had this really terrible surge the last couple of years. And it has been almost entirely focused among Black Americans, and especially young Black Americans. And it's just it's heartbreaking. It's been a real regression, a real backsliding to an era that we thought we had left behind.
Right. What was the second group behind African Americans? Was it a close tie with any other community of individuals, or
no? There's been a slight rise in the homicide rate for Hispanic men, but it's so much milder than what's happened among African Americans.
So did your article present any solutions? Or are you thinking about solutions that you would offer to Congress or state legislators or those advocates that are working on this kind of work? What do you think the path forward looks like?
Well, when it comes to social media specifically, I think I would just hope that this article gets people at least thinking about this in a way we haven't until now. One slightly hopeful thing that I didn't have room for in the article is that some of these researchers have now gotten a lot of money, a big grant, to try to see if they can come up with some, it sounds kind of utopian, but to come up with some other form of social media that could basically be like an antidote or an alternative for young people.
Promote the positive.
To promote the positive, exactly. To sort of inoculate them against the very toxic, incendiary stuff that you find on the existing platforms.
Wow. Anything else from your article that you wanted to make sure we touched upon that you think is critical for our listeners to be aware of?
I would just note that this problem has been around, as many of your listeners know, that this problem with social media has been around as long as our phones have been around. But it really did get a lot worse the last couple of years because of the pandemic and the pandemic closures. The fact that we were just much more on our own and isolated, and so much more of our communication happened online, happened on the phones, on the platforms, and so it really just exacerbated this problem. And as I see it, it's just one more example of how what happened when we sort of when we allowed the social fabric to unravel somewhat, to allow our normal face-to-face community ties to unravel and to grow distant from each other. And it's just so important that we now rebuild the norms, rebuild the fabric, and just kind of come back together so that our interactions don't just happen on those platforms where things can often just become so overheated.
Right, right. I know in places, we're based here in Los Angeles. I know places like here, for example, in the summertime, they offer what they call, I forget the exact name of the program. I think it's Lights Out or something like that in the parks, where basically they're looking for other opportunities to engage young people, give them something else to do, keep them off their phones, keep them from, spending so much time gaming. So I think you're right that getting back to that, let's just go outside. Let's play. Let's do what we used to do when, let kids be kids and let them interact with other kids and do things that are fun outside of just being all the screen time,
Exactly.
So hopefully programs like that. And Urban Peace Institute is a part of that program.
Great.
So, well, wonderful. Well, we look forward to continuing your research on this topic and keeping us abreast and hopefully seeing, some folks taking this seriously and taking steps to try to limit the impact of social media among youth and violence. So thank you, Alec McGillis, for sharing your article, and keep up the great work. Stay tuned. You're tuned into KBLA Talk 1580. When we come forward, we're going to talk about the Montgomery Brawl. You might name it something else, but what's taking place in terms of potential civil lawsuits. Stay tuned.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a red spot. Shot with a red spot. Shot with a red spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest spot. Shot with a rest spot. Shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today.
Thank you for continuing with us on KBLA Talk 1580. This is the Areva Martin in Real Time show, and I am Angela Redoff Wright, and I've had the pleasure of guest hosting for Areva today. We are in the last part of our segment, our 2-hour segment for today. We started our first hour with the headlines, headline news of the day. We did our first half hour and the second hour just with Alec McGillis, who wrote an article in ProPublica and Atlantic on violence and how social media is stemming violence among our young people. We're going to close out our hour, last but not least, and certainly so excited to have him. He's bringing such a great energy for our last half hour. That is attorney G. Edwin Rush II, such a distinguished name. And he's with the law firm of Sanders Roberts based here in Los Angeles, where he specializes in premises liability law and employment law. And so in connection with his premises liability work, I think it helps to shape our discussion for this next half hour, which is going back to the Montgomery brawl, some are calling it, and I know there are other names floating around, but we've been seeing the criminal. First of all, thank you, Edwin, for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for allowing me to join you today, Angela, on the Areva Martin Show. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to have this discussion with you here today.
Thank you so much. And so tell us what premises liability law is, because I think that connects to our discussion related to the Montgomery brawl. So when you say you do premises liability law, what is that?
Absolutely. So I am an attorney who actually handles a lot of the different issues that arise when some stuff goes down essentially on someone's property. And we know that things happen because oftentimes someone, either through various acts or omissions, allows or otherwise causes something to happen to someone else. Allegedly. Someone accuses someone of allowing that thing to happen, or someone accuses someone of actually intentionally or otherwise causing something to happen to that person, that person being the plaintiff.
Right. And so go ahead.
Sure. So when those things happen, oftentimes that person may be the person who was present on that property. They could be the owner of the property. Oftentimes, it may be someone who had nothing to do with the people who actually managed or otherwise owned the property in which that incident occurred. But in the area of premises liability, oftentimes there are other people involved who may have had nothing to do with the two people who actually were involved in the actual incident, but through other connections to the incident may be accused of having some sort of liability for having allowed or otherwise been part of this incident that arose.
Okay. So in connection with the Montgomery incident, I think we're probably about a week or two out from that. We've certainly seen in the news the criminal prosecutions that are happening. I imagine we're going to start to hear soon about the possible civil actions that may come out of that incident. What do you anticipate some of the civil lawsuits might be, or what they may look like, against who, involving who?
Absolutely. So I was doing some digging and was looking at, where was this incident in which occurred? So the incident actually happened at this place called the Riverfront Park. And so I looked up what was the Riverfront Park in Montgomery, Alabama. And it took some digging, honestly, because I was looking at, is this a private company? What is this? The Riverfront Park is actually somehow associated with the city of Montgomery. And so I haven't actually been able to figure out exactly what their affiliation is, but I'm going to say that it may somehow be a municipality, a municipal affiliated entity of some sort, if not the city itself. There are actually some contracts that are on the Riverfront's website that actually state that they are a city of Montgomery entity of some sort. So that gives me some clues that it is probably some municipal entity of some sort. And that's just telling me some clues about it.
I appreciate that research, yes.
Sure. Sometimes these municipal affiliated entities may in fact be private companies that may be sponsored by the city, could be some sort of nonprofit organization in which the city organized, but it's in fact a private entity. There are various ways that these kinds of things can arise.
Or maybe the city contracts with the private company to operate it or run it.
Exactly. And sometimes these kinds of entities are part of a city charter. So even though they are part of, quote unquote, the city, they are still private entities.
Right.
Go
ahead.
Sure. So a lot of people are probably familiar with the young man who ended up swimming from the boat into
AKA Aquaman.
Yes.
Aquaman. Maine.
Yes. Aquaman. Exactly. That boat is in and of itself part of this operation of the park. So it too is part of the same sort of entity, city affiliated, perhaps entity organization.
Right. So, meaning the steamboat that the dock worker was trying to make room for, or that the assistant captain was trying to make room for, the steamboat, or the one that the perpetrators were in?
Oh, no. So the one that the gentleman was swimming from. So,
okay.
Right. So that actually gave me clues as well. But I'll let you continue. You're about to ask me.
No, go ahead. So we see the city as a potential defendant so far.
Yes.
Maybe a private contractor that is maybe operating or contracted with the city to do something there. And then there's the boat that the Aquaman man was swimming from. Okay.
Right. And so facts are such that a lot of people remember the gentleman with the hat that went into, they said, space. Some people, the hat when he flung the hat up, and which unfortunately a lot of the persons were it looked from the video trying to beat up one, and which caused the ultimate melee, in which the gentleman swam from the boat trying to protect, and all the rest of people came out allegedly to defend or whatnot. The incident arose, a lot of people initially thought the gentleman with the hat that flung up may have been a security guard or whatnot. From reports, he was actually a co-captain of that same boat.
Right.
So
a much higher level than most anticipated, or assumed, I should say.
Right. But even beyond his level, if he was a co-captain of the boat, he may have been an employee of perhaps, maybe, the city or whatever company the city hired
to
operate the boat. So whatever part he had to play in this whole incident, that company too will be part of whatever situations end up playing out in terms of how all of this arose.
Right. So you set a great stage. We're going to come forward in a few minutes here, but you set a great stage. We have the city as a possible defendant. We have possibly private contractors, the boat owners that could be possible defendants. And we know for sure one of the plaintiffs would be, and most likely the lead plaintiff on anything would be that co-captain that had on the black and white outfit, threw up his hat that is now famous as well. He would possibly have some civil action. So we'll pick up there when we come forward to see what kind of possible civil actions does this gentleman and perhaps others that were present that day. And I would even wonder if the perpetrators are going to try to pursue some type of civil action. I would think not, but you never know in this world and society. So we will continue our discussion with attorney G. Edwin Rush II, talking about the Montgomery incident and what kind of civil actions might arise. We've seen the criminal actions arise, but now we can anticipate there will probably be millions and millions of dollars in claims brought forward in terms of potential civil lawsuits. So stay tuned as he continues to break that down for us.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Connection established. Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
Thank you for continuing with us on KBLA Talk 1580. This is the Areva Martin Show in real time, and I am Angela Reddock Wright, and I've had the pleasure of guest hosting Areva's show today. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We've had some great guests, including our current guest who's helping close us out, Attorney G. Edwin Rush II, who is a premises liability and employment law attorney with the law firm of Sanders Roberts, leading African-American owned firm here based in Los Angeles and serving clients nationally. So thank you, Attorney Rush. You're giving us great insights on the potential civil claims that could be brought stemming from the Montgomery incident from a week or two ago. And in particular, we know that the potential lead plaintiff on any civil action is that co-captain that everyone came to the rescue of and came to protect. And he sought to protect himself on some level as well. His name is Damian Pickett. If he were the lead plaintiff on potential civil actions, who do you think he would sue, and what do you think some of those civil claims might be?
Right. So first off, I felt just incredibly bad for the circumstances that Mr. Pickett found himself in. The fact that, number one, he was there. The reason he was in the circumstances is because he just wanted to park his boat, and he was there for quite a while trying to do so and was being blocked by the fact that there was this other pontoon boat out there that would not move. So there was that aspect. There was not sufficient direction or monitors for the boats out there such that they were either being directed to move, forced to move, or otherwise the area being protected from being blocked. And obviously there was notice that this boat, I told you, it was part of the park itself. There was notice that this boat would come in and out on a regular basis, and it needed the space. So that was part of the aspect. Otherwise, when he did finally get to the area, Mr. Pickett had a disagreement with the gentleman. That's putting it mildly. A disagreement with the gentleman whose boat was blocking him, and it led to what seemed to be allegedly and turned into a whole bunch of violence.
Right.
And there was, for quite a while, appeared to be insufficient police protection, or at least protection there to keep the incident from erupting the way it did until ultimately it was broken up. So there's issues there with security. And I think that will be the basis for any potential lawsuit from from
Mr. Pickett.
Yes.
So like a failure to protect him and others that were at the dock that day, seeking to just work as he was doing or to enjoy being at the riverfront.
Exactly. And you see this oftentimes with a lot of liability cases. They oftentimes hinge on negligence. Negligence, when someone has a duty, someone breaches that duty, ultimately there are damages involved, and you can tie that breach of the duty to a cause of that person's damages. So that will be specific to Mr. Pickett. Was there a duty to Mr. Pickett to keep him safe? And did someone breach that duty that caused him damages? Obviously, the violence that ultimately erupted that caused some sort of physical injury ultimately will then, did that turn into emotional distress of some sort? And how do we quantify the emotional distress? Is he in emotional distress today, weeks later, or however long it's been? And is he seeking psychological treatment for that emotional distress? Is that turning into financial losses for him? Either financial losses in terms of actually having to pay for the doctors to treat him physically and perhaps psychologically, and then missing work and whatever else he has to do to get himself right in a financial sense.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if he could ever go back to work, at least there. I imagine it would be so traumatic to go back to that place and to, feel that maybe you're still not protected. What if could you see him pursuing any type of civil lawsuits against the perpetrators?
I think there's a strong possibility of that. Honestly, they're currently wrapped up in their own criminal issues. And you'll usually see, oftentimes people will let the criminal aspects play out first before you get to the civil, for a variety of reasons. The criminal standards are much higher than the civil standards. To prove criminal guilt, you have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a higher standard than preponderance of the evidence in a civil lawsuit. So if you prove that beyond a reasonable doubt standard, that is going to be great evidence for you in a civil case. Also, in the civil case, many times, and it varies by state, I haven't looked this up specifically for Alabama, but in many states, oftentimes, if you were to pursue the civil first, then you would have Fifth Amendment concerns. Because if someone is forced to testify in a civil case and they still have this criminal case out there, they can claim that they're going to be subject to Fifth Amendment self-incrimination issues.
Right.
And they can't be forced to testify, because if they did, it would affect their criminal case. So there's going to be that issue. So for those reasons, oftentimes, if you're a civil lawyer, you might wait for the criminal aspect to play out first before you handle the civil aspects.
Right. And you do premises liability and employment law. So on the employment lawsuit, we don't know quite yet who Damian Pickett worked for, whether it was for the city or a private contractor or someone else. But let's say he worked for a city or a private contractor. Can you see any, in addition to the premises liability negligence claims, could you see a potential employment lawsuit stemming from what happened that day as well?
Well, I think it will still go to that aspect of the appropriate security measures. Again, if this is a singular operation, the park itself, was there the appropriate measures taken to ensure that this whole area is not only protected, but is running smoothly enough so that you don't have these issues to where people are put in a position to have confrontations such that occurred on that particular day. Before we get to the violence part, we get to just the fact that, hey, a boat was blocking this boat and it caused a situation where the tensions flared. And then, yes, it erupted into violence. But Mr. Pickett was put in a position to where he had to get out of his boat to protect all of his, what apparently were 200 passengers in his boat. They couldn't even dock. So then he had to get out and ultimately try to do what he could do to move the pontoon boat, which was sitting there at the Riverfront Park.
Right. Could you see any of the individuals that came forward to protect and to, fight on behalf of Mr. Pickett? Could you see any of them having possibilities of civil lawsuits?
I can see that possibility.
Mm-hmm.
The issue
Anything's possible in this world, right?
Right. Well, I tell my clients this often: you can't stop people from filing their lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way our system is built. People are going to file their lawsuits with their theories. The video was very chaotic in terms of what you saw people doing. Protection, yes, you can. If you're going to seek to protect somebody for self-defense purposes, you have to use reasonable force. And so there will be a question for the jury where they use a reasonable force to protect Mr. Pickett and others, because it turned into more than just the protection of Mr. Pickett. It also turned into protection of each other in the melee that followed. And obviously there were multiple dozens, perhaps, of people involved in terms of the confrontations that occurred on that day.
That's a great place to pause. Thank you so much, Attorney G. Edwin Rush II, for joining us today to discuss the potential civil lawsuit and liabilities that may come out of the Montgomery brawler incident. You have been tuned in to Areva Martin in real time with guest host Angela Reddock-Wright for the last 2 hours. Thank you so much. Continue to stay tuned. We have great shows lined up for you at KBLA Talk 1580, including next up, Robin Ayers and the Raw Report. You don't want to miss that. Have a great evening, folks, and we'll see you next time.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4, only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.